Hello everyone, welcome to Cyber Inspiration Podcast. My name is Evgeny. I have been around cybersecurity for the last 20 years and I have a lot of experience working with a variety of cybersecurity vendors. My main work is vendor consulting and cybersecurity advisory for companies. As part of my passion in technology and cyber, I've been intrigued to learn how a company starts. I started the podcast to understand the thinking process and what motivated people to start their own company. This podcast is affiliated with Security Architecture Podcast.
I have an honor today to talk to Rick Howard about his book and his inspiration of writing a book. And Rick, I don't know how you write a book because you read so many books and you're actually in charge on telling people what they need to read in cybersecurity. So I'm very eager to learn more about your process and your inspiration about the book. For people that don't know who you are, please explain what you do day by day and what's the book all about.
Sure. My name is Rick Howard. I'm the Chief Security Officer for a company called N2K. It is a training and podcast cybersecurity news network. And it's just a little startup. I'm the only security person in the company, and I'm not allowed to touch anything. So it's an interesting idea. And then I work on 3 or 4 podcasts inside the network. I'm a former military guy. I did 30 years in the U.S. Army. I was initially communications, which led to networks, which led to how do you secure networks. And then my last job, I was the commander of the Army's Computer Emergency Response Team, where I coordinated offensive and defensive actions for the U.S. Army, which was a blast, by the way. It was so much fun. It was in the early 2000s. The internet was new. We were making stuff up as we were going, and it was just a very rewarding job. When I retired from the Army, I went to the commercial sector. Most people like me would go work for one of the Beltway bandits. I don't know, pick one, Lockheed Martin or something like that. That's not what I did. I went to a pure play security vendor. Bruce Schneier was my boss, for one of the original managed service security providers called Counterpane. I did that for a number of years. I ran their global SOC network, and then I went to VeriSign, ran their commercial cyber intelligence service called iDefense. And what's interesting is that little business unit inside VeriSign didn't make a lot of money. It made steady money, but they should have sold it because it wasn't very profitable. But the CEO liked it. He liked what it had. His name was Mark McLaughlin. And then he went off to Palo Alto Networks to take that company public, which is what he did. I went off to be a CISO at a government contractor called Task. And about a year later, Mark called me and said, hey, we need you to come over and help us do what we're doing over here. So I went to work for him as the Chief Security Officer at Palo Alto Network and did that for 6 years. Thought I was going to retire. But I used to go on the CyberWire, which is the podcasting side of the business. So I knew all those guys over there. And so as a joke, I sent the CEO a note and said, hey, you guys should let me do a podcast. And he called me the next day and said, you should come work for us. And so my retirement job is a podcaster or journalist, as they say. And I've been having a blast.
Sounds very cool. So this particular podcast is about inspiration in cybersecurity. I usually cover vendors and founders, why they started the company. But recently, I have been transitioned to do both, to also cover the inspiration of writing books. There's many books in cybersecurity, and we usually dive in to understand what's the book all about. But many people want to write a book, and it's very interesting to understand the process of people, how do they approach to write a book, and what motivated them. So what motivated you to write your book? What happened? What clicked?
I've been doing cybersecurity for a long time. And about 15 years ago, I started to get this nagging feeling in the back of my neck that we were watching what all our predecessors had done in the security field and taken the next step. But we never really stopped long enough to think we were going in the right direction in the first place, which got me thinking about first principles, in science and in philosophy. How do you learn about a subject domain? And the idea of first principles has been around since Aristotle and Descartes, which was fascinating to me. And then I started to think to myself, if that's all true, if really smart people use first principles to solve really complex Gordian knot kinds of problems, what is the absolute cybersecurity first principle? So I've been thinking about it for over a decade, been giving presentations about it. And that's what gave me the impetus to write this book. I think I finally figured it out and put it down in book form.
When you were thinking about the book, did you know who will read this book?
I had an inside edge that most authors looking at the blank page don't have, right? Like I said, I'm a podcaster these days. And before I do an episode in my podcast, I usually write an essay about the topic so I can get my thoughts together and so I can get the sources all collected in one spot. And I've been doing the podcast for about 2 years when I realized that I had enough material that would be a very straightforward book about cybersecurity first principles, because that's what the podcast is about. And so I had an edge. I had a first draft already on paper when we decided to write the book.
Did you decide to do self-publication or go to a publisher, and what was the decision and why? This is more for people that understand the process thinking about how they need to choose one or two.
I've learned a lot about that process, but I also had another inside edge. I went to my boss, the CEO of N2K, and said, do you want to sponsor this as a marketing vehicle for the company so they would have a dog in the fight? He said that was a wonderful idea. And he knew people at Wiley Publishers, which is the publisher that published my book. Like I said, had an inside edge. I had it easier than most people starting from scratch.
So again, this is how the decision is made. Now, even if people, it doesn't mean you can do whatever you want to do. The moment you sign up with the publisher like Wiley, now it's better control your life and tell you what you need to do and when you need to do and what you need to do. So tell me about this part. Was this good or bad?
It was something I didn't know, which was worthwhile going through the experience. The way that Wiley chooses authors is they don't just evaluate the idea on whether or not it might make a good book, but they look at the individual writing the book and whether or not they can promote it on their own, because the publisher is not going to do any of that aside from putting it on their webpage and putting it on Amazon, right? So they expected me, and by the way, the company Cyberware, to do our own self-promotion, which I've been doing, right? And because I've been doing this a long time, I get to go to a lot of speaking engagements. You mentioned the project we were working on, the Canon project, where we identify the most read books in cybersecurity. So I get a chance to get in front of a lot of people. And so the publisher was looking for that kind of ability. If you can't demonstrate to at least Wiley that you can do that, they might not pick you up as an author.
General working with them was okay, or was it stressful to work with the publisher because of the timelines?
They were very amenable to me. And like I said, we were well ahead of the curve than most people looking at the blank page. Here's advice I would give anybody doing this on their own, especially for your first book. I picked 2 of my friends who I respected in the cybersecurity field and asked them to be editors of my book. So they made it so much better because there was an independent view of it. Other authors might go out and hire an editor, right? And that's one way to do it. But I really admire these 2 guys, and they really made it better. But then Wiley added 3 more editors for their process. One editor was for IP, to make sure we weren't stealing intellectual property from somebody else, so a legal review, basically. A second editor was for grammar and style. It had to be in the form of Wiley's style guide. And third was, I did the audio book too. Since I was a podcaster, I recorded the audio version of it. So they handed us over to a set of contractors that did the audio piece of the book. By the time I had gotten through all of that, I think I had read the material completely, maybe 15 times. And even I was bored with it at the end of all that. There's so much stuff.
So it looks like idea number 1, have friends that can actually help you, okay?
Yep.
Help you with the edit. So my mind kind of going to 2 directions. One direction is how to actually keep yourself grounded to write the book. And the second one is, you mentioned, we spoke about the Canon, maybe talk about this part. Let's talk about the motivation first. I want to understand, what is your writing process? Yes, you mentioned you already have all the stuff written, but you still need to say, okay, every Tuesday, every Wednesday, or whatever it is, I'm going to write. Everybody's different. Somebody will have time, and people just schedule time to write.
Yeah, for me, I'm a planner and long-range planner. So I set milestones for the team that we had to get things done by, basically chapters. The big innovation that we had, and we didn't start this way, and we kind of wasted some time up front, is my friends, the editors, and me were trying to do everything in parallel. And I finally put a stop to all that and said, listen, one person at a time. So here's chapter 1. Rick's going to work on this first. And when he's done, he turns it over to my friend, Steve Winterfeld. He's going to work on that. And then when he's done, he'll turn it over to the third guy, Brandon Karff, another good friend of mine, a wicked smart guy, by the way. All right. And then they would work on it. It was a PERT chart of work effort. And the idea was to meet the deadlines, which we did pretty well. All right. That part worked very efficiently, I thought.
We're going from a parallel inspection from a serial inspection, not a next generation firewall.
Exactly right. Yeah, that was the great thing we learned during all that. Yeah.
You mentioned that every time you do a podcast, you need to write an essay that later on turn into the book. So this essay will probably require to do some research.
Sure.
That's also part of the book. What is your approach to research? What do you use? Tools, people, library, ChatGPT?
Just for me personally, I don't understand a subject unless I understand the history of it. If we're going to talk about one of the pieces in the book is how Amazon built AWS using DevOps methodology, right? One writer might just say, hey, this happened on such and such a date, but I needed to go back in my mind and research how Amazon got to that point and research the history of DevOps, which was agile. Before that was waterfall. Before that, it was mainframe programming. So I like that part of it, the history of everything. And what I really like about it is I document all the resources I found that shows me what that history is. And so that builds the framework for me, the architecture of the actual, it's the bones of the book, is that historical perspective. So that's how I do it.
It's a really good way. And interesting now, when I present, I usually go back in time to explain how we got to where we got here.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do. I like that too. I definitely got criticism from my editors. They said, Jesus, you don't have to go back to the Stone Age, but that's just kind of my method.
Are you afraid that we're going to lose the truth right now with all the AI and the generated content, that when you're going to research a subject, you may not even know if this is correct, or if somebody alternated the truth several times so it become not truly correct?
I'm not as worried about it as other people. There's this idea of primary resources in writing nonfiction books. Yes, you use ChatGPT and whatever AI tools you want to get an idea of what you're trying to do. But as the author, you have to go verify that information. That's on you. So it's like Wikipedia on steroids, right? Go to Wikipedia. Oh, that's what they say. Here's a bunch of links. Let me go read those and see if what the Wikipedia page says is true. I would say Wikipedia and ChatGPT are good starting points, but you still got a lot more work to do.
Let's go back and explain what's the Canon security mean for the folks that don't know, as a resource to read how it's maybe started quickly and where it is right now.
I started this when I was at Palo Alto Networks. I'm a big book reader like you are, and it occurred to me that we didn't have a list of canon as literature, one N literature, not two N's where you blow stuff up. So I convinced the marketing department at Palo Alto Networks to let me start a rock and roll Hall of Fame for cybersecurity books. And we modeled it after the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or if you're a sports person, maybe the Baseball Hall of Fame. We have a committee. This year, it's about 20 folks. They read the books and they write book reviews that we publish on the sponsor page, which is Ohio State University. And the book reviews make the case that the book we're reading is one of three categories. One is Hall of Fame, meaning all of us in the InfoSec profession should have read this by now because it's that important. The second is niche, meaning it's a good book, but maybe not everybody has to read it. Like it might be, here's a book on OT security. Good book, but maybe not everybody has to read it. And third, and probably the most important thing we give to the community is do not read, all right? Because there's lots of crap cybersecurity books out there. And if you're going to read one this year, maybe not read a bad one. For the audience, if you're thinking about reading a book, go to the website at Ohio State University, look up the book review and see if it's something that has been recommended or something you might be interested in.
So we're definitely going to put it in the show notes, because for me, a lot of people ask me, hey, I want to go to cybersecurity. Where should I start? And there's a podcast, there's a book, there's a lot of materials. So I believe this can be a good resource for people to start understanding more about where to start in cyber, and not where the industry saying you have to be a pen tester, you have to be this or that. You need to choose your own path. Important.
So we've been doing it now for, 9 years now. There's about 50 books in the Hall of Fame, but it's across a spectrum of different ideas. Senior leadership like CISO books, technical books, malware researchers, software engineering topics, leadership topics. So anything you might be interested in.
Soft skills.
Yeah, soft skills. Yeah, exactly right.
So this is bringing an interesting question. What do you do with your own book? Can you actually submit your own book to Canon Security? How does it work to actually be correct and not, oh, this is incorrect, like why is there focus here?
Yeah. It's a good point. And we've had a number of committee members that are also authors. Okay. So they can't really submit their own work as a Hall of Fame book, but someone on the committee has to pick it up and make a recommendation. So I did not submit my book, but one of the board members, Helen Patton, she's former Ohio State University CISO. She's working in security at Cisco these days. She recommended my book for the Hall of Fame last year. But the rules in the Canon project are you can't get in the Hall of Fame until 5 years after it's published, right? We wanted to have, you can be nominated, but you can't be inducted until 5 years because we wanted to make sure that we just didn't get caught up in the newness of the book, right? So the books have to be evergreen. They have to last the test of time. So there's a 5-year window.
If people can read it, people can write a review about it. They cannot go into this.
Yeah, they can't you can't win the Hall of Fame until at least 5 years after.
So you have still a bit of time there.
Yep.
As every author and every person, and actually this is a very similar question I asked the founders as well. Like we have our down day. We have no inspiration. We don't want to do anything. Or maybe like in case of the founders, it could be bad meeting with the customers. Because of writing, you just, what am I doing with that? Who will care? Nobody's going to read this. Come on, everybody knows about this. What do you do? What do you do to like, okay, no. Let's get out and continue doing the work.
Yeah, that's a really great question. There are multiple times I mentioned before that at the end of this, I'd gone through the material 15 times and even I was going, geez, I'm not even sure if this is good anymore. But then here's the thing you have to remind yourself. The reason you're writing the book is that you had an idea that you thought was worthwhile, right? And just because you are familiar with it doesn't mean that everybody else knows what you know about it. And at the moment you're writing the book, you're the expert in the world on that topic. You're the one most familiar with all of those things. And so just keep reminding yourself and give yourself a break. Okay. You don't have to be a perfect writer every day. Get out of the computer chair, go ride a bike, get outside, get some fresh air and come back to it fresh the next day.
Is this what you do? Do you ride a bike or do you meditate or what?
In my old age, I've gotten really good at just stepping away from the computer and I ride bicycles. And the reason I ride bicycles is because I can listen to audiobooks as I ride. It's one of the ways I consume them, right? So go think about something completely different and then come back to it. And that works for me.
Like this. You mentioned something about 5 years and the book need to actually stay and be relevant.
Yeah.
So when you were writing your book, is this came to your mind, even just the first principle should never change, but what if I'm writing right now will not be relevant in 5 years or 10 years?
Yeah, again, I think I had an edge there too, because the very notion of first principles is they don't change. They shouldn't change. Because if you think you got the first principle of whatever you're talking about and it changes next year, you didn't get the first principle. You didn't nail it. And so the very idea of the topic is, it is the absolute atomic idea of whatever subject domain you're talking about right now. So by definition, then that idea is going to be evergreen and won't go out of style, right? Even if I got it wrong, okay, like we can debate whether or not I nailed what the first principle is. Have I told you what it is yet?
You can mention here for people to enter the book.
Yeah, so here it is. It's like a Twitter line, right? It is this: reduce the probability of material impact due to a cyber event in the next, say, 3 years. And when you break that down, it's in 3 pieces. The first is probability, meaning you have to be able to calculate what the probability of a material event is, which, by the way, we suck at in the industry. I wrote a chapter about that in the book and how to do it, because I think I figured it out. So the first part is reduce the probability, which implies you have to be able to calculate what that probability is. The second part is of material impact. Okay, because we all know that in our network, not everything is important. Only focus on the material things and you'll have more resources to protect the material thing. And the third thing is a time horizon. It's one thing to say, I'm going to protect my enterprise forever in the future. Okay, but the probability of that is completely different than what it might be, say, in 3 years. And so limit yourself to what you're trying to do. And that's what I spent the 2 years writing the book about, trying to figure out what that means.
I think it's a very good explanation. And I always appreciate the idea when people can present a very complicated idea in 2-3 sentences to understand what it is.
That's so funny you say that, right? Because we were talking before we started recording. I get a lot of newbies that ask me how do they break into cybersecurity. And probably the most important skill is communication. So I always tell newbies to practice. It means they have to practice writing. They have to practice speaking in front of crowds. And I always give them a homework assignment. I said, take one of the famous cybersecurity research papers. And I always recommend the Lockheed Martin kill chain paper from 2010. It's about 20 pages, not that technical. So the homework assignment is this: write a half-page summary of that paper that your grandma can understand. And if you can do that, you have a future in the cybersecurity business.
I think it's a very good way. And we always have this joke about elevator pitch, but it's actually very important. Can you explain in few words what your company does? Can you explain in few words what is you consulting on? And back in when I was in Horjovic days, we had no title on a business card. And the idea was that we all in sales. And to people like, it doesn't exist. You're all in sales. Even if you are a technician, if you're a marketing person. And the reason why, because you may meet someone in the street in a conference and ask, hey, what do you do? I work for this company. What do you guys do? You need to sell the company. And you need to sell the company in 2-3 sentences, concise, to the point, and that's it.
Yeah.
You put a hook, and if they bite.
And one level of difficulty is explaining what your company does to another security person. A higher level of difficulty is explaining what your company does to someone who has no idea what cybersecurity is. That's a really big task.
I think in this case, I always use analogy. So when people ask me, what's the firewall? I'm like, okay, pretend you're going to a party and there's a bouncer in the party. And this bouncer need to do X, Y, Z. So I always took analogy from real life. And I think one of my favorite one was explain what's SIM to the people not in cybersecurity. And I think the analogy I came up with is a condo building, whereas a concierge in a condo, and the concierge know who lives in which apartment and they know what's happening. But when the party starts and everybody go to the same apartment, the concierge will know and able to correlate who came and who came out to say where's the party happening, you know.
So what you're saying is everything's reduced back to storytelling, and that's what it is, right? It's exactly what it is.
And it's interesting because we all like stories. Doesn't matter which age we are. You mentioned audiobooks, movies, kids. If I can tell you a story, it's actually what I like about Palo. When Palo started, there was a story in Palo Alto. There was an explanation. There was a how it started in Checkpoint in Juniper, and it didn't work out.
I love,
but then
I
the
know.
idea.
I told that story 100 times. Yeah, I love that story. Yeah.
Give me popcorn, and I know why. I know explain. It's similar to CrowdStrike as well. There's Dimitri. He went and worked in McAfee. He did that. They didn't buy it, and he changed. He tried. This is where I think the great company came and coming because they have a history. They have something that people want to listen. It's actually one of the reasons why I started Cyber Inspiration, because when I read this, listen to Steve Jobs' biography, I was like fascinated. Oh, okay, this is what motivated him to do the product, is the calligraphy he learned in school. So what if I'm using XYZ product? Who is the person behind the product? Who is the person behind the book? Are they a good person? Are they a bad person? Are they a very motivated person? So this is how all this started.
Yeah, it's one thing to tell a story about a firewall company, all right, and then the firewalls do X, Y, and Z. It's another to say, Nir Zook, Unit 8200 in Israel, joins Checkpoint, and blah, 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 that entire story. That is so fascinating compared to, oh, no, a firewall that blocks on port 85, whatever. Okay, so, yeah, storytelling.
Great. Thank you very much. I do have one last question that I wanted to ask. If you need to go and do everything from the beginning, would you do anything differently for this book?
We were doing endnotes when I first started writing the book and didn't realize till halfway through that we needed footnotes. That's a really tactical detail, but I can't tell you how much work it was to go back and find and do the footnotes correctly. I wish I'd have done that from the beginning. That would have saved us a lot of time.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Really pleasure talking to you. We'll definitely link to all the links need to be linked, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir.
Everybody, thank you very much, and we'll see you next episode.